Hello there! So this week's video is another one that's not exactly a speed paint. It's going to be a bit of a story time kind of slideshow thing where I'm going to go through some photos I've picked out of drawings that I've done throughout my development, just to show where I've come from. So starting here, they're not the earliest sort of drawings that I have, but I think they're just a good starting point to figure out my development when I started actually trying to learn how to draw. So these here, the drawings that I'm going through right now, are what I drew before I actually started finding tutorials online. I did most of these around when I was 8 or 9. I think these were when I was 8. And you can see a lot of anime influence in this one particularly. Those eyes I think I took reference of in Pokemon, but without actually looking at reference. I didn't really understand that you can copy things while looking at reference, or having a reference open when you're drawing can help you draw something. So yeah, this is about the level of art that I had, and these are all the ones that I picked out from before I started looking at reference. And then I picked out some of the things that I copied while actually looking at reference. So it started out pretty much just copying anime screenshots. Here we have Hikaru or Kaoru. I'm pretty sure this one's Hikaru from Oran High School Host Club. And then here is something that I drew without reference, but with some of the skills that I got from looking at reference. You can see that proportion's a bit better. Here's another one where the eyes are very, very, very anime, but they're better, I think, structured than the ones that I did without reference. Yeah, so Naruto chibis are really simple. This is around when I was 9 or 10. When I started looking at reference, this one was copying something I found online, this one was copying something I found online, this one wasn't, but then this is when I started looking at shading and toning a bit. So I considered this about the highest point of my ability without copying at around this stage. I must have been 10 already here, which the proportions are still weird, the body's a bit weird, the neck's a bit weird, the head's definitely too big, even if you try to consider it chibi, and the expression. And I thought the shading was oh my god, look at the shading, but I didn't really understand the planes of the face. On the right, this is something that again I did when I was around 10, and then here on the left is something from 2016, so something really recent, because I found this sketchbook a while ago, and so I decided to put it back into my sketchbook to try to redo it. So over here is the face in the similar style, and then the body and the pose and the expression. And this is something else that I copied, but this is my parents had got me some pencil sets. So this is again from when I was 10, 11 maybe, where I was copying something that I found online, but I had extra pencils, so I tried to do more detailed shading, and I had ink pens. I didn't quite know how to get smooth lines. I didn't really figure out how to do thicker parts on one end and less thick parts on other ends. And then here again, another copied from a screenshot thing. I tried a bit of colour, but again it's a flat colour, and you can kind of see a bit where I first sketched out the eye that I erased it on his forehead, and then the nose I tried to do it on the side. It's yeah, this looks about right. Yeah, and then here's another one from that sketchbook that I found where, again in 2016, I decided to try redrawing. I thought this girl was so cool. Oh my god, look at me with my hands in my pockets and I've got rollerblades and I have this cool expression. And yeah, I just really like doing this thing where I redraw something that I've done before. And then here's moving up again. This might be when I'm 12, almost 13 probably, of drawing without reference. And then here's drawing with reference again. This is a Sasuke. You've definitely seen this around if you're in the anime community. But yeah, trying to work on the shading again with inks, trying to do shading things. And then this is from my sketchbook without reference. This one, the shoe was a part of a class assignment, and then the two characters are my classmates, I think. And then here's a huge sketch page, so I was trying to practice some more. This is starting to get more into my current art style, and then again more copying things from screenshots. And I learned a lot from copying things from screenshots. This is a copy of a character from a manga, so I diversified a bit, not only copying from anime screenshots but also copying from manga I was reading. This is, I think, the most advanced sort of thing that I got from copying screenshots. And then here's me trying to do a bit of some realism studies, and by this point I've already started doing some digital work, but I put that in a separate folder to start my digital journey start to finish. So this I did without reference. I did it with a mirror instead, so I started learning a bit more how to do it from life. This is again without reference around that same time, but trying to do something stylized. I hadn't quite figured out any sort of style that I wanted, so it's sort of vague. And then another one of my realism studies, I went through a huge realism kick. and I started trying to do more coloured things because up until now I barely had any coloured things traditionally, but by this point I'd already started doing digital things, and in digital things I usually always coloured, so I tried to do some coloured things traditionally, which they're not that good, but I think they're improving. And so this is the last one from this folder that I have of things that I got with reference, and here's the start of my digital journey. So this is the sort of thing where I did I'm pretty sure that it was copied, the actual drawing, but I did the lines with ink pens on paper. I scanned it and then I coloured it in Photoshop. And same here. This one I did entirely with Photoshop, but at this point I was working with a trackpad, my laptop's trackpad, not a tablet or anything like that. Same here. And I didn't have Photoshop CS4, I had Photoshop Elements, so you can see some of the burn tool and trying to do some cell shading, but also trying to blur things a bit. I was really experimental. The background, if you thought this background looked really cool, it's a screenshot from a Pokemon episode. I didn't actually draw that. And then this was me trying to do some line art on the computer, and I discovered that like the shape tool has a line option where you can pick the sort of how many pixels thick you want the line to be. So yeah, I was trying to do that, and then I sort of blurred the line because I learned from the first tutorial I saw online that if you blur the plain lines a bit, it'll smooth them out sort of. So I tried doing that with hair, and like it doesn't really look that good. Again, trying to do something fully digital with the line tool for line art, and this was better. By then I got on my tablet, but the lines aren't that smooth, the drawing ability isn't that great, the colours are a little bit awkward, and you can really see the like scratchy lines of the tablet because I didn't do smooth strokes with the line art, and give the noses and the colours I picked for the shading, yeah, a lot of things, and then yeah, this is really messy. But I had my tablet and I was learning my way around it. Here's where I discovered, this is the first thing I ever did where I discovered the pen tool. So with the pen tool I could get those smooth lines and it wouldn't be shaky from me trying to use my tablet. But I didn't quite know how to colour it, so everything's going outside the lines. But yeah, this was a huge breakthrough for me. And then I'm trying to get here I was experimenting with a bit more of a sketchy aesthetic digitally to see if I could just like work with my like shaky train track motion of sketching. So I think this is pretty cool. Going crazy with the pen tool here and trying to blur out my shadows again because I was trying to go for a painterly aesthetic but not a painterly aesthetic, and it was just like an in-between type of stage where I wasn't quite sure what I wanted. This one's working out better, like the blur it seems more confident, but either way the colouring still needs a lot of work even though the actual drawing abilities do something a bit more stable. I did this half and half, I think it looks like. I did it half with the tablet and then half with the pen tool. Here I did it without the pen tool at all, and I thought myself, I was just like, oh, I'm so fancy, look at me with all my smooth shading and stuff. But then now looking back at it, it's just a bit too, it's like over blended, and the line up is again pretty shaky, but this was a huge sort of step in the right direction, I think. Same here. And then the closed folds, because I was being a bit more ambitious trying to do full body things, but the closed folds don't really follow the way that clothes should fold as much, I think. So that was something that I would consider that a weakness of mine at that point. This was a collaboration that I did with a classmate of mine. She did a sketch which I lined and then later coloured digitally, and he's working again with the sketchy aesthetic where it was working a bit better. Here I think it finally clicked to me how to do smooth line art with a tablet, and then this was the point in my development where, because I used Photoshop, but because like I would have used Paint Tool Sci if Paint Tool Sci worked for Macs, because I've always had a Mac since I started digital art, but Paint Tool Sci doesn't have pressure sensitivity on a Mac. But then I got it anyway, even though it doesn't have pressure sensitivity, so I would do everything in Photoshop, open it in Sci and do some blending and then put it back into Photoshop and keep going. But then like, yeah, it has a sort of strange aesthetic to it now. And yeah, the line art here isn't that nice, and I tried to do smooth blending, but yeah, here I decided, like, I finally figured out that if I'm going for cell shading, like a pen tool aesthetic, I need to commit to it. And if I'm going to a painterly aesthetic, I need to commit to that. So here's sort of, I guess, a good example of what I got to in the height of my pen tool obsession. And then this is what I got to in the height of my keep things blended obsession. And then here's when I was trying out a new sort of painting technique. I did these lines all with the tablet, and I'm like, this is sort of like as nice as I'm going to get with my line art. But then with the shading, I tried to do this thing where I had my brush at lower opacity, and if I wanted it to go darker, I'd go over it more times. But I hadn't quite gone through the breakthrough of color choosing, and I hadn't learned how to blend like alt clicking, so you pick the color that's there and then you go over it. So I painted this way for a long time, and you can see it here again. It's a little more blended because I used a soft brush instead of a hard brush, but yeah, it's that sort of thing. And here again, that same sort of opacity on the brush and trying to go over it multiple times. But I think I got a lot better with like doing full body things. My clothes folds aren't perfect, but they're on their way there. I had a better sort of sense of texture because I went through that phase that everyone goes through in digital art where they realize, oh, I can overlay a texture over this. But here I was learning not to put it on every single thing. And then yeah, this was about the height that I got in with pen tool line art, but then a more painterly sort of colouring. And then this is with manual tablet line art and painterly colouring, but not painterly like now painterly with the opacity thing. Yeah, this is about all the things that I got picked out for my early digital art development. And here I've selected some that I've considered like sketchbook photos, like traditional sort of photos from like now that I consider myself more like past the beginner stages, like my intermediate sort of level of sketchbook things. So you can start seeing the date right on there now. And a lot of this, I went through a long phase where I didn't really sketchbook, I only did digital art. But then I had to go without my computer for a couple months because I was moving. And so I started using the sketchbook a lot more, and then I got more into the habit and I haven't really stopped since. Yeah, so this is where I was sort of trying to figure out my own style a bit more. Like I'd still look at references, but then I got more of a feel of how I wanted my art to look, and I had a set of characters that I'd already started drawing with, and then I had more of a feel of like shading and like light and dark, and I knew more about colour, but I didn't really exercise it that much in my sketchbooks. So yeah, here I'm just like experimenting with pencil things, sort of sketching a lot, getting a lot of mileage in to the sort of things I wanted to draw. A lot of pencil stuff earlier on, and then I got into a bit more inks and things. Like this one's from just a couple months ago, and then this one was from that first sketchbook, and I did a draw this again, which I like to do often. And yeah, here's when I feel like this is a lot more representative of the type of thing that I draw now, so it looks more cohesive to what I can draw now. But it took all that sort of things that came before to get this far. Yeah, it's just working on sketching, doing a lot of mileage, doing a lot of different things. It's getting into like painting a bit, getting into like colour pencils in my sketchbook some more. And just, yeah, now this is getting into like really recent. This is the last sketchbook that I finished not long ago. And some painting that I've been doing. This is all in the past 6 months, really. And then I have one last thing to pick out to show you, which is my more kind of up-to-date kind of digital things. Like here, these are from 2014, but they goes really fast to something more recent. So here's where I was developing my sort of painterly style, where with like alt clicking to blend, and then I did a lot of anatomy studies, obviously. Yeah, a lot more of trying to figure out how to develop a digital painting style, and I started colouring the lines and the line art. Even if I don't do a line art and leave it sketchy, I still try to make it blend together. And yeah, just a lot of developing. And I think this is the height of the alt clicking with line art sort of blending style, like a sharp line art that's coloured, but then I blended all the painting things. So this is about as good as I got. And this is already 2015, I'm fairly sure. And then I started getting into pixel art and trying a couple things of lineless painting and doing a hybrid sort of cell shaded, but I erased a bit of the cell shading and added some gradients to it. So I started doing that. Here's that same sort of painting style, and I challenged myself for a summer to only do things with backgrounds. So if it's personal art, it has to have a background, so those two are from there. And advancing with my pixel art. This is animated, but I don't think it's going to show. And this one's also animated, but I don't think it's going to show. This is about as good as I got in terms of pixel art with being small in the scene and animating. And then I took a large break from digital art between here and here. because I didn't have my computer again, so I did a lot of the sketchbook stuff between there, and then I just got back to it and I found that I was a lot faster, I had a lot more movement, and then I started doing even more painterly things like this, and this is quite recent, this is in the last 3 months, where no solid line art, no kind of selections to fill base colors. This is all like really organic type painting, and this is about where I'm at now in terms of painting skills. And so yeah, that's just about where like my art journey and my art development, it jump started when I started looking at references to draw, and then it just progressed from there, and you can just see the anime influence and how I was like really anime when I first copied anime screenshots, and now I'm still pretty anime, but it's not as glaringly in your face, kind of exaggerated chibi type of things. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you find it relatable. Like and subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next week.